My husband said I was too weak to handle his family's money, so I proved him wrong by taking half of everything he thought he'd hidden. Garrett's family had treated me like expensive wallpaper for 12 years. Decorative, but never part of the real conversation. Every Sunday dinner at their estate, I'd sit quietly while they discussed offshore accounts and shell companies, smiling vacantly whenever they glanced my way. Poor little Vivian, his mother would whisper to the other wives. Bless her heart. She tries so hard to understand business talk. They had no idea I held a master's degree in forensic accounting. The charade started before our wedding. Garrett's father pulled him aside at our engagement party. Son, you need a prenup. Protect the family assets. Dad, she's sweet but not exactly Harvard material. What could she possibly take? I overheard every word while serving their bourbon. For 12 years, I played the perfect trophy wife. I organized charity luncheons, redecorated their vacation homes, and smiled blankly during their business meetings. Meanwhile, I was memorizing account numbers, photographing documents left carelessly on desks, and recording conversations through my phone. The family business was a construction empire built on government contracts. What they didn't advertise was how those contracts were secured. Bribes disguised as consulting fees, environmental violations buried under falsified reports. Workers paid under minimum wage while executives skimmed millions. I documented everything. The breaking point came last month. Garrett's younger brother died in a motorcycle accident, and suddenly someone needed to organize his financial records for probate. Can't Vivian help? The family lawyer suggested. She handles your household accounts. Garrett actually laughed out loud. My wife? She can barely operate our coffee machine. We'll hire professionals. That night, I brought him his nightcap and kissed his forehead. You're right, darling. I wouldn't want to mess anything up. 3 days later, I filed for divorce. By noon, federal agents were seizing every computer in their offices. The IRS froze 17 accounts across 6 countries. The FBI perp-walked Garrett out of his corner office in handcuffs. His mother called me hysterical. How could you destroy our family? We treated you like a daughter. No, I said calmly. You treated me like furniture. Expensive, but ultimately disposable. What do you want? Money? We'll pay anything. I smiled, watching the news coverage from my hotel room. I already took what I wanted. Half of everything you thought I was too stupid to find. But that was just the appetizer. What they don't know yet is that I've been building a case for something far worse than tax evasion. Those construction accidents that killed 17 workers over the past decade, they weren't accidents. I have the safety inspection reports they buried and the testimony from survivors they paid to stay quiet. Tomorrow, the families of those dead workers will have everything they need for a wrongful death lawsuit that will bankrupt the entire dynasty. And Garrett still doesn't know about the recording I made of him confessing to his father about covering up those deaths. The recording happened 3 months ago during one of their private study sessions. I'd been bringing them coffee and cigars for years, invisible as always. This particular evening, Garrett's father was agitated about something. The Peterson boys' family is asking questions again, he said, loosening his tie. That crane collapse at the Riverside site. I froze in the doorway, coffee tray balanced perfectly in my hands. Dad, we handled that. OSHA accepted our report. Our fabricated report, his father corrected sharply. If they find out we knew those cables were compromised, my phone was already recording in my apron pocket. Look, 17 dead workers in 10 years is unfortunate but not unusual for projects this size, Garrett said, swirling his bourbon. We saved millions cutting corners on safety equipment. Those families got their settlement checks. Everyone's happy. Everyone except the dead men, his father muttered. Garrett shrugged. They knew the risks when they took the jobs. We're not running a charity. I'd heard enough. I backed out of the room silently, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped the tray. That night, I uploaded the recording to 7 different cloud services and mailed copies to 3 separate safety deposit boxes across the state. Now, watching Garrett's shocked face on the evening news as reporters shouted questions about federal charges, I finally allowed myself to feel the satisfaction I'd been suppressing for over a decade. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Mrs. Morrison, this is Patricia Chen, attorney for the families of the Riverside construction victims. We received your package. Can we meet tomorrow? I smiled and typed back. Absolutely. I have much more to show you. The next morning, I sat across from Patricia Chen in her downtown office. She was younger than I expected, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a stack of files that reached her elbows. Mrs. Morrison, what you've provided us is extraordinary, she said, spreading photographs across her desk. These internal memos, the safety reports, the financial records, this is exactly what we've needed for 3 years. I pulled out my leather portfolio. That's just the beginning. Her eyes widened as I showed her page after page of documentation. Forged inspection certificates, payments to OSHA officials, medical records of workers who'd been injured and intimidated into silence. How did you get all this? She asked. 12 years of being underestimated, I said. They discussed everything in front of me because they genuinely believed I was too stupid to understand. Patricia leaned back in her chair. The families have been fighting for justice since 2019. 2 of them lost everything pursuing this case. They'll want to meet you. That afternoon, I found myself in a community center conference room facing 11 people whose lives had been shattered by the Morrison family's greed. Rosa Martinez, whose husband fell when scaffolding collapsed at the Harbor View site. David Kim, whose son was crushed when a concrete mixer toppled due to faulty brakes they knew needed replacement. Elena Vasquez spoke first, her voice steady despite her tears. My husband worked for Morrison Construction for 8 years. He told me something was wrong with the equipment, that men were getting hurt because of shortcuts. When he complained, they fired him. 2 weeks later, he got a call offering his job back at double pay if he kept quiet about the safety issues. She paused, clutching a photograph of a man in a hard hat, smiling. He needed the money for our daughter's medical bills. So he went back. The next month, a crane cable snapped. Luis was directly underneath. David Kim nodded grimly. They paid us $50,000 to sign a non-disclosure agreement. $50,000 for my son's life. I was drowning in funeral costs. Couldn't think straight. I signed. They preyed on your grief, I said softly. That's what predators do. Rosa Martinez slammed her hand on the table. 23 years of marriage, and now I work 3 jobs to keep our house. My husband died because they wanted to save money on cables that cost less than Garrett Morrison's monthly car payment. I opened my portfolio again. I have the purchase orders for those cables. They bought the cheapest grade available, certified for half the weight they were lifting. Patricia Chen examined the documents. This is criminal negligence at minimum, possibly second-degree murder. Over the next hour, I walked them through everything I discovered. The pattern was sickening in its consistency. Morrison Construction would bid low on projects by cutting safety costs, then bribe inspectors to overlook violations. When workers inevitably got hurt or killed, the family would offer quick settlements with ironclad NDAs. The worst part, I explained, is they actually had a budget line item called incident management. They literally planned for people to die. David Kim stared at the spreadsheet I'd provided. Incident management. Like we were just expected collateral damage. To them you were, I said. Garrett once told his father that paying death benefits was cheaper than buying proper equipment. The room fell silent. Finally, Elena Vasquez spoke. What do you need from us? Nothing, I said. I have enough evidence to bury them legally and financially. But I wanted to meet you first. You deserve to know that someone was finally listening. Patricia Chen gathered the documents. With this evidence, we can file wrongful death suits against the company, Garrett personally, and his father. The statute of limitations is suspended when fraud is involved, which these cover-ups definitely constitute. She looked around the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we're going to bankrupt the Morrison family. That evening, I returned to my hotel suite and poured myself a glass of wine. The news was playing footage of Garrett's father being led away in handcuffs, his usually perfect silver hair disheveled. My phone rang. Garrett's number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Vivian. His voice was strained. We need to talk. Do we? They're saying I could face 25 to life for conspiracy and manslaughter. My lawyer says the evidence is overwhelming. I sipped my wine. Imagine that. Look, I know things got ugly between us, but we were married for 12 years. That has to count for something. It does count for something, I said. It counts for knowing exactly how you think and exactly how to destroy you. Vivian, please. I made mistakes. You made choices. I corrected. 17 men are dead because of your choices. You don't understand the pressure I was under. Dad built this company from nothing. I couldn't let him down. I set down my wine glass. Do you want to know the exact moment I decided to destroy your family? He was quiet. It was 3 years ago. The Riverside collapse. Remember that? Vivienne. 4 men died that day, Garrett. 4 fathers. And that night, at dinner, you complained that their families would probably want compensation. You said, and I quote, "These people breed like rabbits. Kill one breadwinner, and suddenly, we're supporting 8 kids forever." His breathing was audible over the phone. I served you chocolate cake while you calculated how much their lives were worth. You put a price tag on human beings like they were construction materials. I was upset. People say things. No, Garrett. You revealed who you really are. And I realized I'd been married to a monster for 9 years. I ended the call and blocked his number. The next morning brought chaos. The morning news led with footage of FBI raids across 3 states. Morrison Construction's government contracts had been suspended pending investigation. Trading in Morrison Holdings stock was halted after it plummeted 90% in pre-market trading. My phone was buzzing with calls from reporters, but I ignored them all. I had one more visit to make. Garrett's mother lived in the family estate, a sprawling colonial mansion that had intimidated me for years. Today, it just looked like an overpriced prison. She answered the door herself, which was unusual. The staff had probably quit or been arrested. "You," she said, her voice dripping venom. "How dare you show your face here?" "Hello, mother-in-law." I walked past her into the foyer. "We need to talk." She followed me into the living room where I'd sat silently through countless family meetings. "You've destroyed us," she said, collapsing into her antique wingback chair. 3 generations of building this family's legacy, and you've torn it all down. I sat across from her, crossing my legs elegantly. "Your legacy is 17 dead workers and countless injured ones. Your legacy is bribing government officials and falsifying safety reports. Is that really what you want to be remembered for? Those men knew the risks of construction work. Did they know their equipment was deliberately substandard? Did they know their safety inspections were falsified?" She looked away. "Business is complicated. Sometimes difficult decisions." Stop. My voice cut through her justifications. "I have recordings of those difficult decisions. I have financial records of every bribe, every cover-up, every life you treated as expendable." Her face crumbled. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand something," I said, leaning forward. "For 12 years, you treated me like I was invisible. You mocked my intelligence, dismissed my contributions, and excluded me from every important conversation." I stood up. You never thought to ask what I did before I married your son. You never wondered why a woman with my background would be content arranging flowers and hosting tea parties. You were a housewife, she said weakly. I was an undercover forensic accountant, I corrected, and you gave me unlimited access to 12 years of evidence. The color drained from her face. Every document you left on your desk, every conversation you had in front of me, every careless comment about your illegal activities. I recorded it all. I pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the coffee table between us. These are copies. The originals are with federal prosecutors, the IRS, and the families of your victims. She opened the folder with shaking hands. Her own handwriting stared back at her. Notes about bribing city councilmen, lists of OSHA violations to hide, calculations of settlement costs versus safety improvements. You kept records of everything, I said. Very thorough, almost like you wanted to get caught. We needed documentation for tax purposes, she started. You needed documentation for criminal purposes, I finished. And now that documentation is going to put your entire family in prison. She closed the folder. If you hate us so much, why didn't you just leave? I considered her question. Because leaving would have meant those 17 men died for nothing. Because walking away would have let you destroy 17 more families. Because someone had to speak for the people you silenced. I moved toward the door, then turned back. Oh, and one more thing. This house? The one you've lived in for 30 years? It was purchased with blood money from those government contracts. The FBI is seizing it next week. Her sharp intake of breath followed me out. 2 weeks later, I sat in Patricia Chen's office reviewing settlement offers. The wrongful death lawsuits had moved faster than anyone expected, partly because the evidence was so overwhelming, and partly because Morrison Holdings was desperate to avoid a public trial. They're offering $200 million total, Patricia said, sliding papers across her desk, split among the 11 families. That's not enough, I said immediately. It's more than most wrongful death settlements. It's not about the amount. It's about accountability. I pulled out my phone and showed her a news article. Garrett's father just posted bail. He's living in a penthouse in Miami while Rosa Martinez works nights at a grocery store to pay her mortgage. Patricia nodded. What do you suggest? We go to trial. Full media coverage. Let the world see exactly what these people did. That's risky. A jury could award less than the settlement offer. Or they could award punitive damages that bankrupts the entire family tree. I closed the folder. These families deserve their day in court. 3 months later, the trial began. The courthouse steps were lined with protesters holding photos of the dead workers. News vans filled the parking lot. I sat in the front row, directly behind the prosecution table. Garrett looked terrible. Prison had aged him 5 years and 5 months. His once perfect hair was unkempt, his expensive suit replaced with an orange jumpsuit. His father sat at the defense table, still trying to project authority despite the ankle monitor under his pants leg. The prosecutor's opening statement was devastating. She walked the jury through each death, explaining how Morrison Construction's cost-cutting had directly caused every tragedy. Luis Vasquez died because the defendant chose cables rated for 5 tons to lift 15 tons of steel, she said, holding up purchase orders. This wasn't an accident. This was murder for profit. When my turn came to testify, the courtroom was packed. I'd refused all interview requests for months, so this was the first time I'd spoken publicly. The prosecutor established my credentials first. Master's degree in forensic accounting from Northwestern, 8 years working for the FBI before my marriage, specialized training in white-collar crime investigation. Mrs. Morrison, how long were you aware of your husband's criminal activities? I suspected something within 6 months of our marriage, I answered. I confirmed it within 2 years. Why didn't you report it sooner? I looked directly at Garrett. Because I needed enough evidence to ensure convictions. These people are wealthy and connected. I knew I'd only get one chance. The defense attorney stood up for cross-examination. He was expensive, the kind of lawyer who usually got rich people acquitted regardless of the evidence. Mrs. Morrison, isn't it true that you're a bitter ex-wife seeking revenge? Yes, I said simply. He looked surprised by my honesty. I am bitter, I continued. I'm bitter that 17 men are dead. I'm bitter that their families have struggled while their killers lived in luxury. I'm bitter that it took 12 years to gather enough evidence to stop them. But you profited from your husband's crimes, didn't you? You lived in expensive houses, wore designer clothes, drove luxury cars. I did. So you're not exactly an innocent victim here. I leaned forward slightly. No, I'm not a victim. I'm a witness. And everything I witnessed is documented in the evidence I provided. You systematically destroyed a family business over personal grievances. I exposed a criminal enterprise that killed 17 people. I corrected. If that destroyed their family business, so be it. The defense attorney tried several more approaches, but each backfired. When he suggested I'd fabricated evidence, I calmly explained the chain of custody for every document. When he implied I was motivated by money, I revealed I'd donated my entire divorce settlement to a fund for construction worker safety. The families testified next. Rosa Martinez spoke about her husband's final phone call, how he'd expressed concerns about the crane cables just hours before they snapped. David Kim read text messages his son had sent about unsafe working conditions. Elena Vasquez broke down describing how she'd begged Luis not to return to Morrison Construction after his first injury. He said they promised things would be different, she sobbed. They said they were implementing new safety protocols. It was all lies. The defense strategy seemed to be blaming the workers themselves. Their lawyers argued that construction was inherently dangerous, that the men had accepted known risks, It was a catastrophic miscalculation. By the time Garrett took the stand in his own defense, the jury was already hostile. His lawyer had probably advised against it, but desperation makes people stupid. The prosecutor was methodical in her cross-examination. Mr. Morrison, did you know the crane cables at the Riverside site were rated for only 5 tons? I don't personally inspect every piece of equipment, but you signed the purchase orders for substandard cables to save money, correct? We bought cables that met our budget requirements. Requirements that you knew would put workers at risk. His lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The prosecutor played the recording I'd made of Garrett and his father discussing the cover-up. The jury heard his voice saying, 17 dead workers in 10 years is unfortunate, but not unusual for projects this size. Garrett's face went white as his own words filled the courtroom. Those families got their settlement checks. Everyone's happy. In the gallery, Elena Vasquez stood up and walked out. Several other family members followed. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts: criminal negligence, conspiracy to commit fraud, manslaughter in the first degree for each of the 17 deaths. Garrett was sentenced to 25 years to life. His father received 15 years, which at his age was essentially a death sentence. The civil verdict came 2 weeks later. $400 million in compensatory damages, $2 billion in punitive damages. Morrison Holdings filed for bankruptcy the next day. I was having coffee in my new apartment when Patricia Chen called with the final update. They've liquidated everything, she said. The estate, the cars, the art collection, even Garrett's mother's jewelry. Every asset the family owned is being sold to pay the judgment. What about offshore accounts? All frozen and recovered. Your financial records made it impossible for them to hide anything. I walked to my window overlooking the harbor. Below, construction crews were building a new memorial park dedicated to workplace safety. The Morrison family's former estate was being demolished to make room for it. There's one more thing, Patricia said. The families want to meet with you again. They have something to say. That evening, I found myself back in the same community center where I'd first met the victims' families 2 years earlier, but the mood was completely different now. Instead of grief and desperation, I saw something I hadn't expected: peace. Rosa Martinez spoke first. Mrs. Morrison, Vivian, we wanted to thank you. You don't need to thank me. Yes, we do. David Kim stood up. For 2 years after my son died, I felt helpless, angry, like the system was designed to protect the people who killed him. Elena Vasquez nodded. We knew something was wrong, but we couldn't prove it. We couldn't fight people with that much money and power. You gave us justice, said Rosa. But more than that, you gave us our voices back. The room erupted in applause. I felt tears I didn't know I'd been holding back. The memorial park is just the beginning, David continued. We're creating a foundation to push for stronger safety regulations. We want to make sure this never happens to another family. And we want you to run it, Elena added. I stared at them. Me? You understand how these people think, Patricia explained. You know how to find the evidence that brings them down. Who better to protect workers than someone who's already proven she can take on the most powerful construction family in the state? 3 months later, I stood in the office of the Morrison Foundation for Workplace Safety. The irony of using the family's name for an organization dedicated to preventing the crimes they'd committed wasn't lost on anyone. My first case came from a whistleblower at Titan Construction, Morrison's biggest competitor. Apparently, the Morrison trial had scared some executives straight, but others had simply gotten more careful about hiding their crimes. I smiled, reviewing the evidence folder the whistleblower had provided. Safety violations, bribed inspectors, covered-up accidents. It was like looking at a playbook I'd already mastered. My assistant knocked on the door. Mrs. Morrison, there's a call for you. Someone from the Department of Justice. Transfer it to my office. I sat behind my desk, the same desk where Garrett's father had once plotted to cover up worker deaths, and picked up the phone. This is Vivian Morrison. Mrs. Morrison, this is Special Agent Rodriguez with the DOJ's Worker Safety Task Force. We have a proposition for you. I'm listening. We've been following your work with the Morrison case. We'd like you to consult on similar investigations across the country. I leaned back in my chair. How many similar cases? More than you might think. The Morrison prosecution has encouraged other whistleblowers to come forward. We're looking at potential criminal enterprises in 12 states. I thought about Rosa Martinez, working 3 jobs to keep her house. About David Kim, who'd spent his son's life insurance money on legal fees trying to get justice. About Elena Vasquez, who still cried when she talked about Luis. Agent Rodriguez, how soon can we start? 6 months later, I was testifying before Congress about the need for federal oversight of construction safety. The hearing room was packed with families who'd lost loved ones to corporate greed. Senator Williams, the committee chair, asked the question everyone had been waiting for. Mrs. Morrison, based on your experience, how widespread is this problem? I looked at the cameras, knowing that executives across the country were watching. Senator, the Morrison family wasn't unique. They were just careless enough to get caught. For every case we prosecute, there are dozens more where companies successfully hide their crimes. What would you recommend? I pulled out a thick folder. Mandatory federal oversight of all construction projects over $5 million, criminal liability for executives who sign off on substandard safety equipment, and whistleblower protection that actually works. After the hearing, I was approached by a woman I didn't recognize. Mrs. Morrison, I'm Catherine Webb. My husband was killed at a job site in Colorado 3 years ago. The company covered it up. I handed her my card. Tell me everything. As we walked out of the Capitol building together, my phone buzzed with a news alert. Former Morrison construction executive dies in prison. Garrett's father had suffered a heart attack during his morning exercise. He was 73. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no sadness, just emptiness where hatred used to live. That night, I called my sister for the first time in 2 years. She'd supported me through the divorce, but distanced herself when the criminal prosecutions began. Vivian, how are you? I'm good, actually. Better than I've been in years. I saw the news about Garrett's father. Yeah? How do you feel about it? I considered her question. Like a chapter is finally closed. I can stop looking backward and start looking forward. What's forward look like? I gazed out at the city lights from my apartment balcony. Somewhere out there were families struggling with the aftermath of preventable workplace deaths. Executives calculating whether safety improvements were worth the cost. Workers going to dangerous job sites because they needed the money to feed their kids. Forward looks like making sure this never happens again, I said. 2 years later, the Morrison Foundation had expanded to 35 states. We'd helped prosecute 47 cases of criminal negligence in workplace safety. The federal oversight bill I'd proposed had passed Congress and been signed into law, but the case that meant the most to me was the smallest one. Maria Santos called our hotline about her husband's death at a small construction site in rural Nevada. The company had fewer than 20 employees, nowhere near the size of Morrison Holdings, but the pattern was familiar. Substandard equipment, falsified inspections, a quick settlement with an NDA. I drove to Nevada myself. Maria met me at a diner outside her town. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 25, with 2 small children playing in the booth beside her. Mrs. Morrison, they offered me $50,000 to sign papers saying I'll never talk about what happened to Carlos. What do you want to do? She looked at her children. I want them to know their father died for something that mattered, not just because some rich man wanted to save money on safety cables. The case took 8 months. The construction company was small enough that losing a wrongful death lawsuit would bankrupt them entirely. They fought viciously, hiring expensive lawyers and private investigators to dig up dirt on Maria. But I'd learned from the Morrison case. Every document was authenticated. Every witness was prepared. Every potential attack was anticipated. When the verdict came back, guilty on all counts, $2 million in damages, Maria broke down crying. It's not about the money, she kept saying. It's about Carlos mattering. That's when I understood what I'd really accomplished with the Morrison case. It wasn't just about destroying one corrupt family or recovering billions in damages. It was about proving that every life has value, that the powerful can't kill the powerless without consequences, that sometimes someone who looks weak and decorative can bring down an entire empire. I thought about Garrett, serving his sentence in federal prison, his mother, living in a 1-bedroom apartment after losing everything, the executives across the country who now triple-check their safety protocols because they're terrified of ending up like the Morrison family. My phone rang. Another whistleblower case, this one involving a mining company in West Virginia. I answered on the first ring. Morrison Foundation. This is Vivian. Ma'am, I work for Blackstone Mining. People are dying here because of safety shortcuts. And nobody will listen. I grabbed my notebook. I'm listening. Tell me everything. As I wrote down details of another cover-up, another pattern of corporate greed choosing profits over human lives, I smiled. Garrett had been right about one thing. I wasn't Harvard material. I was so much better than that.